Hello everybody, welcome to another session. Today I'm going to be talking about quick Revit tips and tricks. There are 6 things I'm going to talk about today. The first 2 is probably the most basic stuff for everybody who wants to do batch plotting and batch exporting. The next one I'm going to talk about is the wall tips and tricks. The next 2 I'm just going to be talking about just the title block revision to show up in all sheets. And we're going to also demonstrate an alternative to make your revision show up in all the sheets. And finally, I'm going to do a good trick. It's basically scale model families within Revit. Let's get to this. All right, so if you have a default printer, Adobe PDF installed, typically I would recommend user go right-clicking on it and go to printer preferences. Now, the trick to make your Revit batch plot is to basically set a specific location where your Adobe PDF is going to be set. Right now I set my location as cplot, but this one you can put it into any location you want. It could be on somewhere on your server, but typically for me I like to put it somewhere on my desktop so that whenever I print, it's going to always be on that location. The next step I would do is turn this off, view Adobe PDF result. By default, it's always going to be turned on. I don't find this very useful because every time when you batch plot, it will always shows up preview. So I would recommend turning it off. The next thing is that by default, this is always check off. I always say, you know what, I would just replace it. Don't ask me, just replace the PDF. Now, if you don't want that, you can always check it on, but I do recommend just check it off. The next thing I would do is go to layout, click on this advance, okay? Within this, there's a one called print quality. Now, by default, it's set to 12,000 DPI. General rule is that 12,000 DPI, it's going to take you way longer to print, especially when you have a lot of raster images. So my recommendation is that you would tone it down to 600 DPI. The reason is when you're doing a large format print, a lot of the print shop has printer devices that print the DPI, the fastest DPI they had, especially those black and white OSE or KIP. Their maximum resolution is 600 DPI. Now, if you want to get even faster, I typically set to the lowest setting, which is 300 DPI. Okay. Now, this will affect the speed. So I would recommend if you want to do like medium quality, go 600. I would use the higher resolution, let's say 2400 or 1200 DPI. It's only if you're printing those inkjet plotter that's very slow for your material board. So for most cases, if you're doing black and white, I would tone it down because 12,000 DPI just, it's going to slow you down. It's going to take you twice as long to print. So change that setting, test it out. I can verify that by doing this, you can actually speed up your printing process. Once you have that thing all set up, click OK. Now the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm just going to open up a sample project that I used to use a lot. So here I'm just going to go into the this amenity place, amenity house. So what I'm going to do is if I want to print, all I have to do is just go print, and here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this, select in session. Okay, change it to in session. I would just say check none, check this off, and say I want all my plans. Okay, so I'm just going to select all the plans, and I'm going to go save as plans. Okay, once I hit OK, I'm just going to say OK. Do you want to continue? Now, before I do that, let me go into my plot that I've set. So let's say here's my view. I'm going to say yes. And you will notice that it will start printing and place those files in this location. Now, there's a certain chance you will see your PDF plotting, like this icon right down here, stop spinning. Okay, if it stops spinning, it means that your PDF is basically set in limbo, so you can't do anything without having to end the process. Now, you don't have to shut down the whole computer or shut down the Revit whenever that happens. So what I typically recommend, if you do run into those Adobe icon that's stuck in limbo, it's not doing anything, it just froze, the first thing I would recommend user doing is go to your task manager. Okay, I always recommend you to kill the acro tray. Okay, just go end process. What this would do is that it would just kill the current process, and then it moves on to the next print. Okay, so it's no longer stuck, so it just process the next PDF. If you don't do this, you're just going to be stuck there for hours and hours, and then you're not going to do anything. So I would just recommend, that's just a tip, just kill the acro tray. All right, next step I'm going to show you guys is when you go export. Okay, let's do the export part. Now, in the beginning, when I showed you is that you can save the plan in the print, and then what it does is that when you go to export, those plans exist. Okay, this is how I do it. You go to print, okay, and then next thing you do is that you go select. Here I'm just going to go in session. Okay, I'm going to go check none. Here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to basically set my plan and section. Okay, I'm going to go save as, elevation, and section. When you hit close, the next thing you do is that when you go export, CAD format, DWG, you notice that you have that option now. Okay, there's a couple things in here. By default, when you save to AutoCAD, by default you're gonna have this AIA standard, or whoever gonna set it up, it's gonna have some sort of a setting. Now in here, there's one interesting caveat, is that when you click on the color part, there's one for the index color, where when you export out each of this, it's gonna be a layer with a color. So what happened with this is that every time you choose this as an option, it's going to save that as whatever color it is. Now, you could switch it to true color RGB value. Now, this is especially very useful if you are doing, let's say, a color elevation, a floor plan that has a color, you want to keep that color, I would change it to this. Now, I'm just going to set it up so that you'll see the differences between them. So I'm just going to go to my elevation, okay, this one in particular. I'm just going to change this to so that it's not it's a color elevation. So in here, I'm just going to click this on and change it to consistent color. Now, the unfortunate thing about Revit is that whenever you have a shadow, it does not recognize shadows. So let's assume that this is what you want. You want to go export, CAD. In this particular case, I'm going to choose two options. One is the first I'm going to choose is the index color. I'm going to go next. It's going to tell me what it is. Okay, so here I'm just going to go export. Let's do one for this date, and then I'm just going to replace this 255 color, and then just say yes. And then I'm going to do another one when you go export. Okay, and then choose this particular settings, true color. Okay, go next and say true color RGB. Okay, so inside the CAD, this is what it's going to look like. So I have 255. When you click on this, this is what you're going to see. This is the standard whatever AutoCAD layer. Okay, whatever color it is, it is set to what that is. Now, if I open up the other one, let me go into, let's see, the true color RGB. You notice that some of the colors shows up. Okay, Also keep in mind, Revit, when you export stuff out, it does not recognize hatches with color. So when you look at this particular case, it has some color plus hatches. So the hatches will take precedent, okay? Now, if you want the color to show up, my best bet is that just turn off the material, right? So I would just say turn off the hatch pattern. How you do this is you can go to elevation, go to model, okay? Click on all, and then you click on this and say turn this off, okay? What this will do is that it only shows up as a color, and then you can always go, you know, export DWG, and then here I'm just gonna say no hatch. And then once I go in here, I want to open that up. Let's say no hatch. And then what you're getting is the true full color. Okay, so that's the trick, especially if you want to do a lot of let's say color elevation and you want to give it to contractor. This is a perfect way to do it. Now unfortunately, I'm not sure about 2019, because 2019 has this new feature where you allow you to save as color and hatches at the same time. So I'm gonna test that out, but this is only for if you're doing exporting out using 2017. I'm pretty sure 2018 is the same thing. Great, let's cover the next thing. Okay, wall tips and tricks. Now, most people know how to do walls. I won't talk too much about, you know, some of the basic stuff, but some of the stuff I'm gonna be showing you is just kind of like, you know, some of the unknown stuff. Okay, so when you build the wall, let's assume that you have an arc. Okay, this looks fine. Okay. Whenever you do a straight wall, you can do this, edit this, and you can say, oh, okay, I want to do an angle here. Now, how would you do the same thing when there is no edit profile? Okay, there's a couple of ways you could do this. So I'm gonna delete that wall. One thing you could do is that you can create a roof. Okay, pretty simple. All you have to do is just make it like parallel to it. Okay, so you can define one side as slope. Okay, define a slope. Let's say 15 degrees. Okay, so here what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna go, let's say 20. Let's go to 1 meter. Let's go 2 meter. Now what you can do now is that you would attach it to the underside of this. Next thing you would do with this is you would say new construction, destroy new construction. And then once you've done that, the next thing you do is that you would change this to show complete so that it just hides that completely. So now what you have is that you have a wall that you can basically just represent that. Now what if you want to do something else? Let's say a wiggly, like let's say like really wiggly kind of a wall. So the first thing I would do, if you want to do a wiggly wall, my recommendation is that just pick one corner to the X. Okay, just call this thing, let's say reference ref. Next I would do is that I would draw an elevation. Okay, next thing you want is that you want to create one. It's called the model in place. And in here, I would just pick my wall as my category, and I'm gonna call wall void. In here, what you can do is that you can do an extrusion. Choose that reference plane. Now, if you don't give it a name, it's not gonna show up here. So I typically recommend that if you're doing anything that you want to reference or plane with it, or have a plane that shows up in your work plane, make sure you always put a name on it. So here what I'm going to do is let's do Okay, once you have that, all I have to do is just go corner to corner. Now, Revit has this tendency to either want to work or want to fail, depending on how this wall reacts. So for now, I'm just going to basically put all side, change it to void. Okay, and now what you can do is that you can say cut. I hope this works 50-50. Sometimes it will give you an error message, but okay, good, it works. And finish. So there we go. So if you want to do like a really like curvilinear kind of a wall, that's the trick that I would use. Now, what other tricks that you can do with Revit? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you one tricks that kind of get obscured. Let's assume that you have a wall. Okay, right now this wall has. I should change this to the other direction. Okay, so you will see it on the exterior. Now what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to change it to fine, and in most cases what you have is that you have a floor that's like 400 millimeter or like 1'6" or etc. So let's assume that I'm going to basically go to the edge of that masonry wall, to this edge of this masonry wall. Okay, now by default this is what it looks like. Now if you want this to basically go down and basically hide that wall or hide that floor, this is how you do it. So what you do is that you go to edit type, click on this, okay, and then click on the preview and make sure that it's set to section. Okay, the next thing you want to do is that you click on modify, and then you can unlock this. So select that, unlock it, select that, and unlock it. When you hit OK and OK, now what it does is that it gives you that two kind of like arrow, and then when you click on this, you see that base extension. Okay, let's say I'm gonna go -400, and what it does is that it will cover those up. So in here is the same thing. So you want to go -400. It will just basically cover that up. Now this is very important, because you no longer have to do a lot of this joint geometry. You could still use joint geometry, but the thing is that this is a little bit more effective. Okay, so you don't have to do a lot of joining and stuff like that. So this would be a perfect way to do it. So here I'm just going to copy it on top and say this is level 2. So assuming that this one is set to level 2, okay, if you want to do it to the interior, now it's the same principle. So you go inside this, edit the type. Okay, in here I would just say go to the top and just say okay, this one, and this one, and then when you hit OK and OK, now the top one is going to get the same treatment. And then now what you can do is that you could say top base extension, just say -400. It's going to go down, so that's what it looks like. All right. It's a very cool little trick. I don't think a lot of people know about this. If you do know it, good for you. You probably learned it from somebody. I learned this from when I was attending at AU. I didn't know this until someone just showed me this is how you do it. All right. The next thing I'm going to talk about is, let's assume that you want to put in two materials between this wall. By default, what a lot of users would recommend is that, oh, why do that when you can use stack wall? Perfect legitimate answers. The only problem with stack walls is that you're going to have an issue when you try to tag those walls. Okay, stack wall has some issues with tagging, so rather than doing that, I'm going to show you another method. Okay, so for this particular case, what I want is that I want the bottom part is going to be, let's say, concrete CMU, and then the top one is going to be just brick. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure you be in the section. Next thing I want to do is I want to split the region. So what you can do is that you could say, okay, for this one I want to be, let's say, 1800. Okay, fine, that's good. Now you have to click on modify, because the problem is that previously I had this unlocked. Once you split it, it will not recognize it, so make sure you have that unlocked. Now this will give you this so-called variable. Okay, next thing I want to do is that I want to create finish 1. Next, I want to change the material. Let's say I want to change it to concrete masonry unit. You click on this, assign layer, and pick this particular wall. You notice that it's going to have 2 different materials, and say OK and OK, and you notice that it starts to show up as a different material. So this is perfectly another way to kind of like, if you want to do like a stack, not really a stack wall, but you want a wall and you want this, and then this is what you're gonna get. Now the nicest thing about this is that once you have this thing lock in, it will basically highlight in gray. Okay, you can also do it on the inside as well, so it works both sides. The next thing you want to do is that if you want to, let's say, add in like a reveal or a sweep, this is where you can do it. You can click on this and say I want to load a profile. Let's assume that you want to do this. Distance, let's say I want it to be the same, 1800 from base. And when you hit apply, this is what it shows. Okay, when you want to go in. Okay, so if you notice that it's kind of like, okay, it's off, then you can do the offset. So here I'm just going to go 12.5. Let's start from 1 inch. Let's see if it works. Ooh, maybe. Okay, so I should call it 1 inch. Let's say ½ an inch. Let's go 5/8. Okay, 5/8 works. Say when you say OK, OK, and OK, you notice that it's gonna do that. Okay, so this is quite good. Now, when you put in a door, something to kind of keep in mind. Once you have this opening, now this thing will not clean itself, so you kind of have to move this at the side. Okay, that's the only caveat I have with having a built-in sweep, because it will not clean up itself. But the wall itself, it will clean up automatically. It's just only that little bits and pieces. Okay, there is another one. Let's assume that you want this particular thing to kind of wrap inside. So what you could do is, let me go click on this. Okay, wrap, it's in here. You see the do not wrap. I'm gonna go exterior at the end. Let's go exterior. So what happened is that it's gonna wrap towards the inside. So assuming that you're at this particular location, and I should turn this to consistent. By default, you're not gonna show anything, but if you do wrap, okay, it will basically just wrap it in. Now, in this particular one, when you hit a door, it will tell you where to go, kind of a thing. Now, what you can do with doors is that you can actually control how much you want this to kind of, go in and out. So the first thing you will do is that you go into the door. Okay. What I typically recommend doing is just add a line. Okay. And let me see if there is a reference plane. If it doesn't have a reference plane, this is going to make it a little bit tricky to do it. But you know what? I'm just going to use this. Let's assume that this is going to be 100 millimeter. Okay. Now, what I would typically do is that create a, let's say, wall corner finished. Let's assume that. Okay. Now, the next thing you want to do is that you want to highlight this. Define origin. There we go. That's the one I'm looking for. There's one called the wall enclosure. Check that on. Okay. And then when I go inside and say I want to go into the project one, you notice that all of a sudden that basically just have that wall enclosure going in. Now what you can do is that when you click on this, edit the type, I have one in here where I say wall corner finish, so you can wrap it in. So assuming that this is 200 millimeter, or let's say 25, this will basically means that whenever you do anything, this particular corner will just go in and out. Now the unfortunate thing about this is why I'm saying this is going to be a little bit tricky, is that make sure that you are basically tied into a reference plane. Okay, since this one, this unfortunate thing is that it doesn't have a reference plane, you're gonna have some issues with that wall corner finish. So if you have a reference plane with a reference plane, it will work much better. Okay, let's assume that I'm gonna add a reference plane, and I'm gonna tie this in. Let's assume that this one I wanted to go with this. Okay, let's see if it works. If it doesn't work, make sure that when you build it from ground up, you must have something here. Let's assume this one. Let's go to front. Let's make that front. Okay, so let's see if it works. But if, okay, there we go. Starts to work. So if it's 25, let's say I want to do 150. Let's see if it works. Okay, good. 200. Great. 300. There we go. So that's how you do it. It's basically if you want this to control how much you want the exterior kind of finish up with your door, this is how I would do it. It's a very small, minor kind of a tweak that I don't think a lot of people will know if you never do this. All right, the next thing I'm going to talk about is that, okay, in the past, when I do, let's say, a generic wall with CMU, you know, structure, this thing didn't exist. Okay, so let's say you want to do a wall with foundation. Right now, all you have to do is do this, and it would just do that foundation wall. In the past, this is how I would do it. Is that I would use the stack wall. Okay, duplicate, call this thing foundation. And in here, what I would typically do is that I would say, okay, this one I'm just gonna go exterior CMU, and here I'm just gonna say foundation, and here I'm just gonna say 200 just to preview it. So this is what it looks like. Okay, let's assume that this is what you want. Now the benefit of this is that this is how I would use to do foundation wall. The only caveat with this is that if you edit the profile, let's assume that you have a step kind of a look, right? You see that it would not create anything from here. Whereas if you do this, okay, you notice that it will stay as a wall. So this thing, I would say that these days we use less and less. So what we do is that we would use the wall and then just use the structural foundation under this. All right, let's moving on. Let's say make title revision show up on all sheet. All right, let's move back to one of my project. Okay, let's assume that you want to make your revision to show up. Okay, so in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this. I'm going to add number 6 and say today's date 2018 11 and 05, and then this say issued for tender. All right, now if you want to make this thing show up, you would click on this and say okay, go to the sheet, and you would say okay, this is what I want to show up, make it show up. Now if you want multiple page, you notice that it doesn't work, because right now what I can do is that I could select this thing will show up. Now the minute that I select the both of them, it will not show up. So how do you make them show up in all view? So my cheap trick would be to go to annotate, draw a small revision cloud like somewhere up here so you don't see it. Okay, now what you're gonna do is that make sure you choose revision 6, copy this, paste and align certain view, This is where I can say, okay, I want it all to show up in all of those views that I wanted. Okay, this is what I want. Paste it. Now what you can do here is that you go into the view, go to revision, and say do not show, none. Okay, what it does is that when you go into the next page, it starts to see number 6. Okay, and there we go. Now this works if you have a single issued. Okay, the problem is that if you want to remove some of them, you kind of have to make sure you turn it on and go to that page and remove it. It can be very tedious if you want to remove them all. By that time, what I typically do is that if you want to remove those revisions, just basically merge it up. All right, so that's the easiest way. If you want to get rid of it, just merge it up with the previous revision. Now this works well if you have small project. Now what if you have a massive project where they have like a multiple issue, multiple kind of like deadline? Now this sort of issues will not work, because what I find a lot of the time is that multiple users will work with different stages of the project, and keeping track of this, it's going to be a very monumental task to do it. So what is the alternative to this? So my alternative to this would be to, here, let's see if I have a title block here. Okay, this will be my alternative. So the one part you're going to have is called the issued. The second one is going to be a revision. So what you do with this, I'm just going to go edit. This one is basically a family. So what I did with this is that I create a generic annotation. Okay, this is what I do is that I just fill in all those information. Next thing I would do is that I make it shared. So once I made it shared, all of this information has stamp 2, stamp 3, stamp 4, and etc. You can have as many as you want. Now this revision, what I typically do is that I keep this revision as kind of like whenever you draw a cloud, this will appear. Now this issued, when you load it in into this project, it relies on for a user to set it up a large format. So what I typically do with this is I would say this is one. Today I'm just going to put today's date, 5, and then issued for tender. Oops, I'm not a best speller. So the benefit of this is that you can put it into your multiple revision issued, so all of it will show up simultaneously. So there we go. So how I treat this, like you have an issue, the next one, the revision is going to be 1.1. So whatever issue you put in, let's say this is the first issued, anything come afterwards, if it's a revision, you only have a couple pages to do it, the number would starts from 1.1, and then you just basically fill it in. The next time you have issue 2, the next revision is going to be 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, etc. And you keep doing this, kind of like more of an update to the drawing, so that user would keep track, okay, how many issues we have and how many revisions it's going to be after that. So this is a good way. So think of it as if you ever update iPhone or a smartphone, they usually come with versions, right? So the first release is going to be, let's say you have an iPhone, you have let's say iOS 11, that's the first issued, and after that they're going to have 11.1, 11.2, 11.3 until you hit number 12, which is the latest issue. So the revision is going to be just like that. So you should always think about that when you do drawings as well, so that this is the first issued, and then the revision is going to be whatever falls after this first issued. I tend to like this kind of a method so that you don't have one single revision that take care of everything, because I know that one is going to be very, very difficult to keep track. Larger project, this is a perfect way to do it. I typically do this method for the larger project because it keeps your drawing more organized. If you do it more of a single revision, good luck keeping track, because you have to go in to every single page and you kind of have to go to clicking on this, clicking on that, and it could be very daunting to do it. So I don't recommend it unless you only do smaller projects. All right, finally, what I'm going to be talking about is how to scale within Revit. Okay, I'm just going to go to a plan. Let's assume that you want to, let's go floor plan level 1. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this. Okay, scale this car. Now, a couple times I did this. I did it wrong because I forgot to turn off this thing. The first thing you want to do is that whenever you load any Revit family, make sure this is check off shared, because if you don't, it will not work. Okay, that's my mistake from a couple videos. This was my, I think, third or fourth video that I did, and then I forgot to say check this off, so I have to redo the whole video again. So that's the first thing you want to do. Make sure shared is not turned on. The next thing you do is you create a family. Okay, if you want to make the family scaled, I would choose planting. Okay, and what you're gonna do is that SUV, I'm gonna load it into the family 1. Okay, I'm gonna just dump it there. Now the next thing you have is this little guy here, height. So what I want to do is I want to create a reference plane. Okay, and select that and just say, okay, this is a height. Now by default, you want this to turn into instance parameter, but you can't do it from here. So what you can do is that you can select that and click on this instance parameter. Okay, now their instance parameter, just leave it as it is. Or what you can do is that you can make it a small like limitation. Let's say if you want the limitation to be, let's say 2 meters. Okay, it's gonna tell you that. So yeah, that's what I hate. So here I'm just gonna say 2 meter. Okay, so that's how you do it first. The next thing you want to do, go new, go family again, and click planting again. Okay, planting. Okay, gonna close this out. Family 1 loaded to family 2. Okay. In here, the next thing you want to do, again, it's the same thing. You go to front. Here, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to make it height, and I'm going to make it instance. Now, for this particular guy, the family 1, make sure it's the same as height. Okay. Okay, everything looks good. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to load to project 1. Okay, let's assume that this is car 1 and then car 2. Let's say I'm going to do 3 meters. Okay, I'm going to have problems here. Why is this doing this? Let me double check. Okay, nothing is shared. I have that sinking feeling again. It just doesn't work. Okay, let's do this. Does it shared? No shared. Oh, apparently it does shared. Oh, geez, that's no good. Yeah, that's the danger of having shared. So here, what I'm gonna do is that, yeah, sometimes shared can be very infectious. So what happened with Revit shared is that assuming that you want to tag that element, and if that family is put it inside a nested family, it treats it like it's a shared object so that you can actually tag it. But this particular case, you do not want to have that, or else it will not scale properly. So let's try, I'm just going to say SUV 3D. Okay, make sure that there's no shared, because that's the one thing that may break this, right? So here I'm just going to go family 1. Okay, get rid of this. I'm just going to purge everything just to make sure that, you know, we got nothing in there. SUV 3D, family 1. Okay. Everything is good. Load it back in. Let's say family 2. And in here, everything is tied to this. Okay, let me double check from family 1. Let's make it 600. I'll just make it everything very simple just so that it doesn't change. Okay, so this one is tied to something, 600, and then let me load it back into the project 1 and see if it works. Finger crossed. If it doesn't work, I have no idea what the heck is going on. It's one of those things. Ooh, now it works. Oh, finally. So there we go. So, and then there we go. Let's see, 300. Oh, it doesn't do it. Okay, so it hits its limit. So I think what happened before is that when I have that 200 meters, 2 meters, that basically set the first limit. So if it goes beyond that value, it just doesn't work. So if I go down, it will scale. Okay, so there we go. So you have big cars and you have little cars. Now, where do I learn this trick? Now, there is a blog in the past, but I do recommend people check out Marcelo's work. Marcelo's Scaling with Revit. So what this does is that this guy, okay, does a AU trick, how to scale certain things. He does it like 3 or 4 different ways to do it. How to scale in more families inside Revit. Very good. But what I'm showing you right now is a very simplified version. But I do recommend checking his work out. So if you have a chance, just look at his AU recording. But the one I'm showing you is the most simplified version. This is probably the easiest. So all you have to do is just get one family, and then you just put it into planting, the first planting. Make sure it has a way to flex. Next thing you do is that you dump that into the next planting family, and then you link the first family height with the second family. Once you've done that, finger crossed, it works, and then you can try scaling it. Okay? Hopefully you enjoyed this session. If you have any issues with the audio, I hope the audio's fixed. I don't know what's going on with the last one. But if you do, just comment, and I'll try my best to improve it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.